Hi everyone, welcome to week 3 of our class. I warned you that it would be moving quite quickly, and it's crazy, we're already on week 3. So today I wanted to introduce you to our next learning module. This week we will be digging into more the logistic side of what types of services we are required to provide for the gifted and talented. You will see very quickly that this is a pretty messy topic, and it's honestly something that frustrates me because state to state, even school to school, gifted and talented services are really different. So, as advocates for gifted children, we want to be thinking about how all of this transition is having an impact on their learning and on their social and emotional development. So before I jump into this week's content, I wanted to do a recap of a couple of things. First, I wanted to give a shout out to Sarah and thank her for posting a really excellent article in that Gifted Education in the News discussion post. If you haven't had a chance, I would encourage you to go back and look at that article. It discusses some of the social pressures that high achieving students are likely to face, and all the pressure of making sure that you know what you want to do with your life and you build your resume starting in 8th grade, and what type of emotional impact that may be having on our students. That is a really important concept for us to keep in mind as we continue in our gifted endorsement classes, that these gifted children are not just brains walking around. Like, they have attached bodies and they have attached emotions, and it's really important as advocates for gifted students that we don't just consider their brain, that we remember that they are people with families and with friends, and that they have their own set of unique challenges. One note I did want to make, and I mentioned this in a response to her post, but especially when we think of gifted children and this issue of perfectionism, there's something called multi-potentiality, which, if you break that apart, multi meaning many and potentiality meaning like your potentials. So gifted students have multiple potentials. If they take a classic like career aptitude test, the likelihood is that they will score very high in a multitude of areas. So they get back results and it says you should be a teacher and a doctor and an artist and a pianist, and you just have all of these opportunities. From the outside looking in, that can seem wonderful, like you're so good at so many things. But a lot of the research says that when you pair multi-potentiality with perfectionism, it can be pretty dangerous. So these students think, I'm good at all these things, now I have to be perfect in all of these things. And that leads to a lot of this expectation overload that these students face, and a lot of the unfortunately kind of negative drawbacks in terms of social and emotional development. So I would encourage you to go back and read that article that she posted and continue to just keep an eye out on the news. There's always a lot going on in education. And as future and current advocates for the gifted, I encourage you to be really keeping an eye out on news related to gifted and talented education. So just a few things about last week. So we started to look at what are the characteristics of the gifted and talented. My main hope for you throughout this class is that you have a more broadened view of what it means to be gifted and talented, and that we start to view student characteristics from more of a dynamic than a deficit mindset. So even when we see, quote, problematic behaviors like Adam saying, do you want this finished or do you want this good, which can seem kind of sarcastic and disrespectful. As advocates, we need to be able to interpret, quote, negative behaviors as potential indicators of giftedness. So I wanted to kind of run through a couple of your posts in response to this discussion board. Again, this is based on a true story. It's very realistic that we have a child who is most likely gifted in a school setting where they're just not really fitting into the schedule. And they're saying, I really want to keep working on this project, but you're pushing me and pushing me and pushing me to the next thing. So a lot of you guys did a good job picking apart some of these behaviors and discussing how they could potentially be indicators that Adam is indeed in need of some differentiated services in terms of gifted and talented. So I'll just go through my list here. I really wanted to point out a quote from Tanner saying that Adam had difficulty in accepting the illogical consequence of being told he would miss playtime if he did not finish coloring. That is a really good point from Tanner because it's showing that Adam is looking at this circumstance from a very different mindset than some of the other children his age. So the kids are just saying, I want to finish so I can go outside. And Adam is really interpreting this differently. So he's saying, okay, I'm dedicated. I have a goal in terms of this drawing that I'm making. So why is it logical that since I'm dedicated, I'm going to get punished and have less playtime outside? So that reaction to that illogical consequence should be an indicator, kind of a red flag for us to say, wait, he's thinking differently. So he's interpreting this differently than his peers. Anytime that we have indicators that these students are just kind of mulling things over differently than their peers, it's a really good sign for us to keep tabs on the student and kind of continue to observe what they may be thinking. Leslie did a good job mentioning that Adam was really hyper-focused, also pointing out that he could see these relationships between, here's the Crayola box with that really interesting shading. Let me see if I can bring that shading to my drawing. Both of those characteristics, both the focus and the ability to see those relationships are definite indicators of giftedness. That hyper-focused attention is really important if we think about Renzulli's model, if we think about that task commitment or motivation. Some creativity researchers actually call this flow. So if any of you guys enjoy like writing poetry or even doing art, even cooking, I love to cook myself, that feeling when you get a little bit lost in what you're doing, you don't realize that time's going by, we call that flow. So it's a sense when everything is just kind of molding together in the creative process, and we don't really understand what's going on outside of our own creativity. So some creativity researchers may actually say that Adam's focus and attention and lack of concern about what's going on around him is demonstrating what we call a creative flow process. So just to give you some fun terminology there. Tiffany did a good job picking apart and saying Adam's work is significantly different than his peers. So a key here to remember is Adam isn't simply trying to do the work really well and please his teacher. So if he was more of a high achieving student, likelihood would be he's probably copying the teacher's example really meticulously. He's asking Ms. Conley over and over again, is this right? Is this what you want? Should I do it this way? Am I going to get all of the points? Those kind of behaviors would be more indicative of a high achieving student. But what's happening here is Adam's drawing looks completely different than all of his peers. It is drawn to scale. He's using the shading, and he's even going against his teacher because he's being slow to finish it. So all of those actions which demonstrate that he is different than his peers, those are good flags that he might be indeed in need of some gifted and talented services. I also wanted to point out Norma, who said that Adam's preference for complexity could be an indicator for giftedness. One thing that is important to note here is that Adam is not eager to finish. So this task commitment is really important because he's not just trying to be done and move on to the next thing. When we talk about creativity later in this in the course, we talk about a characteristic called resistance to premature closure. Others would call this open-mindedness. And basically that's the ability to say, I'm not done yet. I want to keep this open. I want to keep adding to it. And when we want to support creativity in the classroom, we want to give students the opportunity to keep thinking and to keep adding on to some of their work. Um, Melanie had a really great point about listening and supporting, or listening to and supporting both the parents and the teacher. So it's important in a gifted advocate stance, as most of you guys will be if you're not already, is that we don't take sides. So we're not saying the parents are always right or the teacher is always right. You guys have actually all of you, I believe, had your own classroom of students. And so we all know that it's not always practical to let one student work on his project for like 2 weeks longer than the other. And so if we come in as this gifted coordinator or gifted advocate and tell the teacher, hey, you're wrong, you need to change everything, that's probably not going to be very useful. So I really liked Melanie's suggestion to say, let's observe Adam in the classroom so that I, as a gifted advocate, can look at Adam and look at some of his indicative behaviors of creativity and of giftedness throughout the entire class. And also Ms. Connolly can be there and we can have two different perspectives. So this really needs to be a team effort between the teacher and between the parents and between the gifted coordinator or the gifted advocate. That leads me to another point. Several of you guys mentioned the importance of a close relationship between the parent and the teacher. I know Jerry mentioned that, which was really good to remember. I did want to put a plug into you all to start thinking about what if these students, unfortunately, do not have advocates at home? What if their parents are not able to come into these conferences? What if their parents are not able to schedule a meeting with their principal? What if these parents are English language learners and they are not able to easily communicate with the principal or with the administrators? So yes, parents are a key component of gifted education. But I do want us to think about how can we advocate for those students who may not have parents who are as visible within the classroom setting. We'll talk about that more in our module on Invisible Gifted, but I did want to put that plug in and have you guys start mulling that over. Couple other notes. Thomas mentioned the importance of Adam demonstrating this goal-oriented behavior. He didn't want to just finish. His goal was to finish well. And I appreciated Sarah's determination to start out this kind of conversation as a discussion of some of the positive behaviors and then maybe going into some of the issues such as him being a little off kilter with some of the other students and talk about some ways that we can differentiate for Adam. So overall, you guys did a really good job talking about these indicators of giftedness. More so, I was really excited to see a lot of you questioning, what do we do? So we have this student, he's demonstrating some of these clear indicators. What do we do for him? Several of you were mentioning ideas for differentiation. And I'll talk through a little bit of this as the course progresses. Differentiation is one way that we serve gifted students, and not just gifted students, but all students within the classroom. So within differentiation, of course, we have that term different. So we have different opportunities in content, different opportunities in process, and different opportunities in product. So when you take the curriculum class, we will focus a lot on differentiation for the gifted and talented. But I just wanted to throw out a couple of initial ideas that I had in terms of Adam's case. So one thing that I've mentioned previously is the importance of letting students have a long-term commitment to certain projects. So that brings up this openness or resistance to closure, as I mentioned, in terms of creativity. And it also allows time for the creative process to flow. So creativity takes time. Creativity actually depends on taking a break from the project. We call that time when we're not really working on the project, we call that incubation. And we'll talk about that more in the creative module. But some practical ideas that I would like to propose. First off, I don't think I've talked about this yet, but my mom is a K4 teacher. So we joke that we have opposite jobs, that I work with the older students and she works with the youngest students. But one thing that she does in her classroom is she has, I think they're actually pizza boxes that she has covered in contact paper, and each of her students has one of these pizza boxes. Okay, within that box, students can keep something for as long as they want. That is their project that can continue from the first day of school and be brought home on the last day of school. And it's a really good practice to say to the students, okay, I can tell you're working really hard on this project. Do you want to keep working on it later if you have time? And if the students want to, they can store it in their box. Okay, so it's kind of like their long-term box. Students don't have to keep something in it to keep working on, but a lot of the students want to keep mulling over certain projects, and I really love the way that my mom has constructed this because it has constraints. So anything that can fit in the box is yours. You can keep working on it when we have free time. You can keep working on it day to day, but you can't fit everything in the box. So practically, as educators, we know you're going to have to finish some assignments. But in Adam's case, his teacher could say, all right, you're doing really well with this drawing of this turkey. I feel like you're not quite done. Do you want to come back to it later? Let's put this in this box right here and we'll come back to it. I can't remember who it was. One of you guys mentioned this idea for differentiation. I'm scanning to see if I can see it, about having a must-do activity and then a may-do or could-do activity. These may or could-do activities would serve well as enrichment. If some of these students who are more advanced than others finish early, instead of giving them more of the same thing, enrichment really depends on giving them something different. So one practical suggestion I would have is giving Adam the opportunity to come back to this project. Another thing that's important in terms of gifted education is teaching our students the importance of real world tasks. So if you project far into the future, Adam's got a job. In the real world, we have this thing called deadlines. Okay, they're always going to exist. There's always going to be some projects that have a definite deadline. So it's important to serve Adam and say, okay, you have a deadline for certain projects, but for other things, we're going to give you the opportunity, if you want, to continue working on it. So helping the students realize that creativity is definitely encouraged, but at times we need to have a finished product sooner rather than later. And that really comes back to clearly defining the goal and being open-minded and working with Adam to help him see that some things need to be completed more quickly than others, but helping him see why. So saying, okay, we need to finish this project because this is actually building us into a different project that's longer and that I think that you'll like more, okay? So make sure that when we are giving these more constricted assignments, we're not just telling our students it's due Friday. They need to know why. They need to know why, from the teacher's perspective, it's important that we finish this. Adam wants to get inside his teacher's mind. His mind works differently. His mind probably works in a manner that's more similar to Miss Connolly than his peers. So as the educator, don't be afraid to let the students in your mind and say, hey, this is what we're working on. This is why I want us to finish, because we're progressing to this next step. So in terms of just practicality, I would say giving the students opportunity to have long-term projects. That pizza box idea is great. You could have, for older students, more of a long-term enrichment project where they have like an independent project that they're gradually working on through the semester. That's definitely one thing. And also being really explicit with your expectations and helping the students kind of get inside your mind and see why it's important to finish a product and why that's leading them to the next thing. So that was slightly more long-winded than expected, but you guys are doing a great job. So you're really leading this discussion. I just think it's important that I kind of take a moment to recap a couple of things in terms of characteristics. So keep those characteristics in mind, especially as we progress throughout the rest of the class, and we will definitely revisit those as the course progresses. A few things to introduce this week. So this week we are looking at whether gifted education is a right or a privilege. Um, it is not an easy topic. This is something that, as I mentioned previously, I find a lot of frustration with because gifted and talented services are so different state to state, district to district, school to school, teacher to teacher. So really what this week is about is investigating what are the challenges that we face when constructing gifted and talented services and learning to defend the necessity of these gifted and talented services. So I wanted to talk very briefly about your 2 assignments this week. So as always, we have our discussion post. This discussion post is a challenging one. So it's asking, basically the case study is looking at the ideal gifted education services that one family was able to provide for their children. Unfortunately, as you're hopefully thinking, not all students have the same opportunities in terms of what gifted services they may be able to receive. So your discussion post really needs to be based on the library. So you need to be able to argue, is gifted education a right or is this gifted education a privilege, and back it up very clearly with the sources. So being able to say gifted education is a right because of this research, because of this legislation. I challenge you on this discussion post not to think about your personal opinion. So the discussion post is all about logistically, legislatively, according to research, what is owed to gifted children. So you need to be really focused with a discussion post on the library materials. However, fear not, because I know this is a very touchy subject. So on the flip side, your assignment for the week is purely based on your personal opinion. So your assignment for the week is to write a brief philosophy statement on what you personally believe to be gifted education. So within that, you'll see that you're answering who are the gifted, what services should we provide to the gifted, who is responsible for providing these services, and what is the role of the teacher, both the regular education teacher and the gifted education teacher in providing these services. So I just wanted to emphasize the discussion post needs to be very based on your library sources. Do your best to step apart from your personal opinions when doing that discussion post. However, when you progress to writing that gifted philosophy statement, that's your opportunity to get on your soapbox and tell me what you think. You are not required to use any sources in that. You don't have to include references. This is your chance to say, this is what I believe. I think having both of those assignments in the same week is really helpful because it encourages you to separate yourself and look at what the laws really say, what the research really says, and then take a moment to let out your personal beliefs because clearly if you're taking this class, we are all passionate about gifted education. As always, I am here to answer any questions and I appreciate you guys. Unfortunately, the cat will not be making an appearance this week because I am in the office. But I hope that you are all doing really well, and I am here to answer any questions or receive any comments, and I hope that the week goes well for you. Okay, thank you.